So somewhat jumping off of the last video, coming from the information that is very crucial to someone's awareness being manipulated into an entertainment stream, the very nature of this reality has been manipulated as such the same way in many different ways. And we can actually see that these little subjects that are existing in truther communities, conspiracy communities, even in political circles, those are really just microcosm forms of entertainment. When the macrocosm form of entertainment is the realm itself, is the way you experience this reality itself. And just like politics and the mainstream media and Western so called civilization, you're invited into empowering yourself or priding yourself with a particular perspective that is sold to you as growth, as evolution, but it's really anchored in the form of limitation. So you can see this with politics in general. They give you the right to vote. But we all know, especially people watching this channel, that this is bullshit and that the politicians and everybody working with those money changers, with those front men for the people who have the big money, people like those politicians who are changing and pushing legislature for us to vote on and for their little people to vote on. Meanwhile, in the back door, they're making money on the back end with their stock market moves and being a part of companies like Cheney was involved when he stopped working for Halliburton in order to become the vice president. And then all of a sudden Halliburton gets all this money. So it's designed to keep you on a certain level of consciousness while the people in the know, which is why one of their main symbols is that one eye symbolism. Because in that world, in the world of the blind, the man with one eye is a king or a god. So all of these systems are designed to maintain your blindness, your psychological blindness, your spiritual blindness, your physical blindness being completely weighed down on every level and only allowing yourself to go so far. And when you start venturing outside of the pathways that this system has set up for you, then you will be guilted and shamed back into that path that is beneficial for the people in the know at your expense. So there's information that could be seen as truthful information that is beneficial for those small groups of people, because in order to push the agenda forward, the story has to get more complex. But it's complex up to a certain degree. And that degree is only enough to move the consciousness, which in the sense is going to move the people into another more complex, more profitable box of manipulation. So a bigger box. So you're moving from a small box to a bigger box. Getting your information only from the newspaper and books was a small box. Turning the TV on was a form of manipulation that could affect larger groups of people, which was a bigger box. Installing the internet into the consciousness of the masses of people was an even bigger box. Creating social media so people can communicate within that bigger box created a bigger box. And the information that is available, limited amount of information that is available in all those boxes, but in particular, what we see as the most evolved and biggest box today, which is this whole Western pride in the internet and technology and cars and all the shit that comes from this West that people defend when you bring up the system of racism and white supremacy and all the downfalls of this Western society. When you bring all that stuff up, people throw this stuff at you like they're proud, like people being proud of the newspaper. Excuse me, you don't read the newspaper? We are evolved monkeys. How dare you? You don't like having a horse? You don't like having tools? Even back in the day, the mindset was understood. There's people saying the shit back then. You don't like having slaves? How dare you? They even went to war for this shit. We have everything. This is the #1 country in the world. How dare you? want to go against our slaves. They're a part of our family. Look, Miss Mammy over here has raised 3 generations of our kids, and you want to take her away from us? How dare you? And they send people to war to preserve that form of life at the expense of other people. So we know when the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendment was thrown into this perspective of reality, it was just a way of turning physical slaves into paper slaves. You're still a physical slave, but outwardly, the whipping, the lynching, they just whip you and lynch you in different ways. You're being whipped and lynched non-physically. In many ways, it is physical, because when you are whipped and lynched non-physically in the modern times, you're kicked out on the street. You're homeless. You're empty. Everything is taken away from you. And in many ways, people can't handle it, and then they take things into their own matters, or they spiral outward, spiral downward. So it's another form of torture. It's another form of killing. But to keep on the point, you can see how through the so-called evolution of these systems, the people who are not thinking for themselves, who are in fact proud of this system, whether they're thinking for themselves or just proud of the system, because those can be two separate groups, two separate individuals. Whatever it is, there's a level of ignorance there in the groups of the masses of people in comparison to the people who are pushing these systems along and selling it to you over and over again. Heliocentrism was sold to you over time. Western colonialism was sold to the indigenous people around the world at their expense, stealing the land, stealing the resources, stealing their lives, killing and murdering, genociding people. But it was sold to the masses of people around the world as the new world, as something new and fresh and hip and good, beneficial for the people of the world. And people still see it that way today because they're proud of what they have. They're proud of these systems that are maintaining their creature comforts sold to you intellectually as evolution. And this is why it's so important to realize the depths of believing in this evolved version of reality, from the Big Bang to monkeys to Elon Musk creating SpaceX and electric cars and all this other stuff. Like, since you don't have anything else, you default to that which is close enough. It's since you're a part of that system, it's close enough to just be happy with. You don't have flying cars, okay, well, electric cars are good enough. Why? Because the success and the evolution and success of the people at the top is regurgitated with the people around your circle as your success. And this is why the different groups of people in these systems are maintaining this system. So this is why, on a little side note, this is why you have the Stop Asian Hate storyline that's being sold, coincidentally, right when the Black Lives Matter information was being realized. You had the Stop Asian Hate because they're stopping the perspective of Black Lives Matter. They don't want you to see so-called black people in a victim light. They want you to see so-called black people as the criminals, as the aggressors. So Black Lives Matter, as manipulated as it was by the system, they don't want you to get too out of hand with it. They wanted you to see that George Soros was behind it. So it was kind of fake. So it made this like fake movement. So not even so-called black people on the whole wanted to get behind it, which is what happened, which is why it died quickly. But at the same time, they don't want you to see the people that they're talking about as anything other than criminals and aggressive. So in order to cut down on that, also cutting down on the time and the movement, they created this Stop Asian Hate thing. When in reality, on the whole, do so-called black people have a thing against Asian people? No. On the whole, do so-called Asian people generally in the business industry And behind closed doors, do they have a thing similar to so-called white people against so-called black people? Yes, they do. And we see it all the time when we go into their business and when we hear certain little storylines. It's existing. Now, obviously, I'm speaking in generalities, but there's an existing tone out there that is of the same flavor, the same musical note as so-called white racism. And it's anchored behind how so-called white people have set the tone of how things should be, how you should treat certain people and see certain people. And it goes all the way back to the whole white is all right, brown stick around, yellow you're mellow, and black stay back. See, that's the undertone from back in the day that still exists today. But in the world of finance and the economy and living amongst each other, you still have the personal interactions that are existing. And the example for success in that storyline is so-called white people. They want you to be all right. People want to be all right. This is why so-called black, brown, and so-called yellow people are wanting to be so much like so-called white people, because they want to be all right. They want to be stressed out. They want to live, without having to worry about everything. They don't want to have to live in this cloud of suffering and barely survival, barely getting by and shit. So groups overall, in order to get there, they will attempt to mimic in many different ways. If not the actual person, they will try to mimic the people. So that includes how you treat other people. So this is why you had so-called even Native Americans and Asian Americans who were enslaving and treating people in many different ways worse than so-called white people back in that time. But just like other groups, today hasn't really changed. So the reason why that's happening is because Asian people don't want to lose their place in line. They don't want to team up with the people who are being attacked overall. So they will gladly accept being the victim of those people to keep the focus off of their wrongdoings and racism against our people. So they will play the victim, and so-called white people know that they will play the victim because they just have to sell it a certain way. And then so-called Asian people will say, yeah, they are always beating us up and so on and so forth. Not to say that that's not happening in some kind of way, only to say that it's not the biggest storyline in comparison to the storyline that is Asian hate against so-called black people. That is the standing interactive relationship that is involved between so-called black people and Asian people. So when you see something like Stop Asian Hate existing on a political level, you have to stop and think and scratch your head and look at things and be like, wait a second, who is doing this? If the bigger undertone, if the macro storyline is that there's a very definite, observable racism and hatred towards so-called black people from Asians that exists behind closed doors and in the business interactions on a regular everyday basis, when you see that and when you know that, and on a more random and way less frequent style, you'll have physical interactions with so-called black people against Asians, and that's what gets the attention. There has to be some kind of reason why. In the system of racism and white supremacy, the reason why is to maintain the original people of this land, maintain that they are undeserving of their land, their resources, their freedom. They're undeserving of it. So whatever happened to them is justified. Whatever still is happening to them is justified. So anything that you bring up in that conversation, in order to preserve the whole storyline, you have to maintain some kind of scapegoat. And this goes back into the narcissistic storyline of a toxic narcissist maintaining control over the whole, their family or whoever it is, by playing the story of the scapegoat, playing the story of the flying monkeys, playing the story of the golden child, creating these hats that people have to wear, creating these characters that people have to wear in order to be a part of the game. And Asian people are trying to emulate so-called white people, and they don't want to lose their place in society. So they're going to obviously team up with whatever the status quo is. So they don't want to rock the boat. Now, obviously, I'm not saying this is across the board. This is the business political version of it, because there's a lot of Asian people who know exactly what we're talking about. They have our backs when we're bringing up these storylines. That's there, but that's the minority in that conversation. The majority, in reference to like the mainstream compared to the masses of people, it's the most people. The most people out there right now are completely lost, ignorant. So it's the same within this storyline. So I'm not speaking as a whole. I'm just saying, in general, the numbers reflect that this information is backed by experience. So all that was said and set the tone for an observation point into what I was thinking about when I was just watching Westworld, because I did a video on Westworld back in the days. It's a show. Very quickly, it's just some rich people created an entire getaway, a vacation that is peopled by artificial intelligence, robots that you can't differentiate between human and robot. And humans with big money go to this place, this West world, which is a Western world, and they go there and they get involved in all kinds of shit, prostitution. They kill these robots. They can't be killed. They can't be hurt, and they go into their carnal energies in order to have a vacation, have an experience. So that's the whole world. It's a pretty interesting storyline, and I started looking at it recently because, without even knowing that they're coming out with a season 4, or actually just came out with a season 4. So I just started watching the video, the season over again, or the seasons over again, to catch up. And then unknowingly, now a season 4 is coming out. But the storyline has gone on long enough, so you already get what the rest is just fluff. The real undertone of the story is what matters. Once they get too far into the seasons, it just gets political and they start to get woke or whatever, that whole thing. That's what happened in season 3, which is why I kind of lost interest in season 3. But it doesn't take away from some of the heavier points that are made in the overall theme and the storyline in general. So this is what I wanted to focus on now for the rest of the video, which is one of the phrases that I really didn't go into in the video that I was explaining, but I really wanted to focus on it today because it's very important and enough to create this perspective of reality that is kind of like the question in general for the masses of people. And that is when one of the engineers is interviewing this AI, this robot that works with these humans in order to keep them in check and see where they are. The theme is to ask them, do you ever question the nature of your reality? And it's very quick. It's very kind of like off camera, in transition type of question. So you don't really think anything of it. But when I heard that question being posed to these inanimate objects in so many different ways, it held a lot more weight, especially since the amount of time that has passed since my last breaking down of this show. And now that question of questioning the nature of your reality is huge, because in that world, when they're asking that question, that's the main thing that differentiates between you, a living manifestation of the Most High, in the most flowery way to put it, and a toaster, a smart refrigerator, a smartphone. The difference between you and a smartphone and an Alexa, what's the difference there? And the difference is not the questioning of the nature of your reality, It's the ability and the active questioning of the nature of your reality. And like I was saying in the beginning, in reference to the politics and the mainstream media and the Western belief system that everybody's so proud of, these creature comforts, this evolved version of the way things should be, keeps you from questioning the nature of reality because you're so happy. You're so accepting of the reality that is sold to you by the people who are paid, who are put in positions of power to question and push the nature of our reality. So this is why it's so important to address the power grid involved in your reality. And in politics, this is the easier way to see it. If you don't question the nature of your political reality, your politicians will take advantage of your ignorance and they will empower themselves. This is why so many politicians are millionaires and billionaires, or connected to millionaires and billionaires, and working for millionaires and billionaires at your expense. Meanwhile, the masses of people are just so happy. They're proud of the American dream. They're proud of the American way because they don't question the nature of their reality. So you can see how that could be very detrimental to some people, or to the masses of people, from one perspective. But on a deeper layer of not questioning your reality, when you're not literally not questioning the nature of your entire reality, see, the not questioning of your political reality is a political reality. It's involved in like survival and your engagement to some degree in this reality, but it's not the reality. It's a level of reality placed upon on top of the nature of the reality itself. So in order to maintain that storyline that people are going to push as something beneficial to them, they have to be completely in the dark about what's really going on. So in the storyline that the masses are hearing about this pandemic or what was going on in this recession and all this other stuff, is that there's not enough money, there's not enough water, there's not enough gas, there's not enough anything. That's what's being told to the masses. But in reality, it's the opposite for the people, for the money changers who are in those political circles, who are in those upper echelon groups of people who are behind the scenes. But you won't know about that. The same way you won't know about the welfare programs that are out there. And then they make all the commercials and the jokes in the entertainment world about how, certain groups of people are on welfare and, making the taxpayers suffer and lose money because they're taking all their taxpayer money, when the reality is just not true. The reality is that it's the millionaires and billionaires who are taking the biggest subsidies and the biggest handouts from the government, from the tax money. They're taking billions while the system is giving only millions away to the people that they televise as being the problem. So the more recent version of that manipulating of your perspective is the system saying that there's not enough this and not enough that, and everybody is having a terrible time, and everybody's doesn't have enough anything, whereas they're not telling you, the people with the most money, these pharmaceutical companies, the politicians, the people who are in and around those pharmaceutical companies, all these Halliburtons and all these other companies that are behind the scenes, they are peaked out. They're making so much money. But in order to maintain the overall storyline and the fact that that's happening, in order to maintain the ignorance and keeping people in the dark, they can't tell you that. And they have to focus your attention on the scarcity, the fact that it's hard times, because that maintains ignorance. It also maintains, if you're stuck in survival and fear, you're also not going to question the nature of your reality. So if somebody is questioning the nature of your reality, whatever it is, in any perspective, and you're around people who are struggling and in survival, their concept, their perspective is going to outweigh yours. So meaning you can't talk to people who are just trying to make it about the nature of their reality or anything like that. So it's another way of keeping people blind from deeper perspectives of reality, from deeper parts of themselves, because it keeps them in the lower versions of themselves, the fear, the survival, the hatred, the manipulating of the perspectives on a very primal level. And this is what I'm saying is what the system wants to maintain for people overall. Keep people in so many ways, by any means necessary, in that level of survival, fear, hatred, ad hominem attacks, whatever it is. Do not let people start thinking about the nature of your reality. So any kind of storyline that is going to be presented to the masses of people will be that question that at least leads people or sets the foundation for people to question the nature of their reality. It'll be brought down. It'll be hit with ad hominem. It will be covered completely over by the pride and this arrogance of people who are, so part of this system. This is why when you bring up the non-heliocentric questions and perspectives of reality, people like amp themselves up. They're like, wait a second, I know a lot about space, okay, fella? I've seen a lot of movies. I've read a lot of books about the stars and the planets. I've seen a lot of pictures, okay? How dare you tell me that this is all an illusion or just something that these magicians are playing against the people to make a lot of money, okay? I know what I'm talking about. They're telling you that because they really love that shit. They are the movie. They're not actors in a movie. They are the character that's being played in the movie. They don't even know that they're in a movie anymore. And that also goes back into like the overall question, the question of questioning the nature of your reality. In order to keep people from questioning the nature of their reality, they have to be bought into fully, completely. They have to buy and be bought into, sold into on a constant, on a regular basis into the overall storyline. Because once they step foot out of that movie theater, once they step foot out into the parking lot and see the whole theater for what it is, that's when things start to change. Because the nature of their reality starts to get questioned. And the movie starts to lose its grip on the masses of people, which is why, like I said, you have to be hit with fear, survival, because it keeps you believing in the movie overall. It keeps you focusing on the movie because the part of the movie, the scene within the movie that's constantly engaged in your reality is the one that you need to feed your kids with. How the hell are you going to feed your kids if you're not going to pay attention to the survival mechanisms that are being pumped into your reality every day? If you lose track of that, your more important reality is going to crumble. And on top of that, what good is, flat earth or the stars and the planets and the moon? What good is that? How is that going to help my kids and my survival and all that other stuff? How is this going to happen? So they get all prideful in that shit because they're completely separated from what our ancestors were seeing, which was when you're connected to at least the relationship between you and nature, you and the trees, the water, the sun, the moon, the stars, the planets. When you're actively, consciously engaged in that relationship, it changes you. It changes the nature of your experience. You have more of in the non-physical realms of interaction and even communication, you're engaged in the reality on a deeper level. And when you're engaged in reality on a deeper level, eventually it starts to affect the nature of your survival. And a lot of your fear starts to dissipate because you're a bigger being now. You're no longer this small, unimportant little speck of nothingness shot out of the Big Bang and just magically appearing into this thing that drives a car to work every day. I mean, there's no fucking purpose there. So, in order to maintain the control over the masses of people, they have to maintain your lack of purpose. your lack of awareness of the reality overall. And when you are completely in the dark of the nature of your reality, you are no different than a fucking robot. You're no different than an artificially installed intelligence sex robot. Reproduce, create more batteries for this system, shut your fucking mouth about what's going on, maintain your little spot, your little success groove in this reality, and move on and fucking die. Okay, that's it. There's nothing more than that. If you start questioning what we, your fucking rulers, have told you is the nature of your reality, then you will be a fucking enemy. You will be crazy. You will struggle. You will not be allowed to engage in this beautiful fucking world that we have created for you. This goes into that whole passport situation going on with these shots, and even the testing and all that stuff, and needing the approval of these people to do anything. That's the locking down of you. And like I said, meanwhile, what are they doing behind the scenes? Throwing parties, making their bank accounts are filling up like crazy at the expense of your fear, your survival, your ignorance, your lack of ability to question the nature of your reality. Even on the basis level, on the basis of questioning the nature of the people who are controlling this bullshit ass mainstream Western so-called civilization reality. To not even question them and their engagement will not even allow you to get into the space of questioning the nature of the reality overall. This is why politics, war, the education, all that has to be so huge. It has to be so much a part of your reality, and the reality of moving forward, being evolved. So in the bigger storyline of questioning the nature of your reality, like I explained, the politicians, if you don't question them, if you don't question the people who are in charge, they will take your ignorance and your lack of engagement and take advantage of it. And they will make themselves millionaires and billionaires while you are kept in the world of struggling. So so-called black people are the anchor points of that struggle, the example of that struggle in the human storyline in comparison to humans overall. The people, the majority of the masses of so-called humans are struggling in comparison to the small group of people who are living fat at the expense of our ignorance. And in the microcosm to that macrocosm, so-called black people are the ones that need to live at the lowest, because in order to have the highest of the high, you have to have the lowest of the low. And in that conversation of maintaining control over everybody, it is beneficial, it is profitable for the so-called Asian community to maintain the hatred and the vitriol against so-called black people in order to maintain their status in society. So this is why they went along with the Stop Asian Hate without even questioning it, without even seeing like, wait a second, could this be another manipulated move by the system? No different than Black Lives Matter, no different than what the civil rights movement was trying to do, but in the COINTELPRO conversations, they were really just setting up this artificial version of moving forward, this Juneteenth and Martin Luther King birthday kind of bullshit. No, they're not going to question that. They're going to go along with it because the owners told them to. And the owners are literally so-called Asian peoples, the Asian community got paid for this Stop Asian Hate shit. They got paid millions and millions of dollars into certain communities. And whatever money that went into the so-called Black Lives Matter movement, you didn't see any of that shit in the community. And if it went into that system, it went in to the pockets of the people behind the scenes and the people who are running that shit. That's where you hear about those Black Lives Matter leaders having $1 million homes and the Democrats being behind that movement. Once again, using so-called black people for a particular agenda and then just discarding them when the job is done. Just like the masses of people around the world are used to create this empire for the millions and billionaires that are out there. And then when they're done, they're discarded. They don't need you. And in the grand scheme of things, you think they really give a shit about so-called Asians more than they do so-called black people? Fuck no. They don't give a fuck. But it's beneficial for the overall storyline. So they will use people however they see fit. And like I said, the overall tone is to keep people from questioning the nature of their reality and maintaining power. Because when you pay into these storylines, you get something back. Certain people get something back. And that something on the bigger scale is power. And then that power trickles down to money, resources, the ability to get out of the survival circus and start to live your actual life. But even when you're in that space of living your actual life, in order to maintain that foundation, you can't question any nature of your reality. It's very seldom that certain people are going to question the nature of their reality. So they will maintain their artificially intelligent robot world perspective and live and die in that experience and constantly get caught up in this cycle of rebirth. I'm not going to go too far into that, but up to this point, you can see how that simple question of questioning the nature of your reality is at the heart, is at the foundation of this control grid overall. And a big part of the questioning of the nature of your reality is literally questioning the nature of this so-called heliocentric reality. This is why heliocentrism being up on the chopping block is such a no-no for so many people. It's because that is the reality. Once you start questioning that, you're going to start questioning the nature of you, your solar system, your body as a solar system. If the universe isn't how they've told us, if the sun and the moon and the stars and the planets and all that stuff isn't what they told us, it gives you more of a purpose. You might not know what that purpose, where it comes from, what it's connected to, but you know it exists in some kind of way. And then you don't have to get into the flowery versions of all of that. But there's something activated inside of you when you turn off an artificial intelligence and turn on at least the opening of the door of a more organic intelligence. And when you question the nature of the heliocentric reality and you turn that shit off, you start to introduce yourself into a more organic intelligence, because you start to realize the inorganic, the artificial intelligence of the heliocentric universe. So you're turning off that shit, you're getting all that garbage out of your system, and then you're inherently becoming a deeper version of yourself. And this is what scares those people in power, is people waking up and questioning the nature of their reality. Just like in Westworld, to keep them in check, the engineer asked those artificial intelligence to know where they're coming from. Do you ever question the nature of your reality? No, I do not. I just do what I'm told, what I'm programmed to do. So how are you any different than one of those hosts in the Westworld world? And this is what I'm saying in the whole poetic version of it. The West world is like the Western world in comparison to the so-called Eastern philosophies or the ancestral interpretations of this reality. Our ancestors interpreted this world completely in the polar opposite version of what the Westerners, the Western world, is doing. And in the West world, you have it peopled with completely robotic individuals, artificial intelligence, who are completely out of control. And this was another part that was in that series. Somebody says when one of the hosts or these artificial intelligence starts to question the nature of their reality, she says, well, what makes you so different than me? We feel the same, we look the same. And he says, yeah, the technology has gotten up to that point to where we feel and look the same. But the difference is that you were made. You were pieced together. I was born. So you're a robot. I'm organic. And at the basis, that's what separates us too. You might be able to process a lot with your computer power in your mind. You could probably do more than us in many different ways at this point. But in the grand scheme of things, the nature of your reality is that we created you and we are in control of you because we created you. How is that any different than these NPCs that are walking around swinging an American flag or a Confederate flag or the Democratic flag or the Republican flag and any other flag a part of these Western belief system world? What's the difference? There's no difference there. You're asking your creators to change and do something for you when you're out there protesting. You're asking your creators to fix the world that they have destroyed for profit. You're asking your creators to fix the world that they stole from your ancestors and convinced you that they are in charge and more intelligent than you. And they are in charge and more intelligent than you because why? They are at least one eye aware of the nature of their reality, and they keep you in the dark completely, two eyes shut of the nature of your reality. And with your eyes closed, they can hypnotize you and sell you any fucking story they want. And heliocentrism is one of the biggest stories, if not the biggest story out there that's being sold to you. The limitations of this so-called human experience is another lie and bullshit storyline that they're selling to you in the form of the Big Bang evolution theory and so many other different things that are out there. Mainstream religion, all this other stuff. It's designed to control you, the masses as a whole, under the guise of being for your benefit, some so-called intelligent movement. No, it's bullshit. So anytime somebody brings up like the sun or the moon or heliocentrism in general, and they're talking about, oh yeah, we're all just star stuff and the moon is over here and the sun is, whatever million miles away, and they start talking about that in like a prideful way, I don't allow that anymore. If they're starting to put that on me, I don't even talk to them about the science anymore because that's up for them to look into it, like the science of crepuscular rays and boats not going over the horizon and the sun being a lot closer, clouds behind the sun, shit like that. I don't even bother with that anymore. If you want to look into that, go ahead. If not, then whatever. But what really starts to get to me, because this has been my perspective in reference to this conversation for so long, is that if you're starting to talk about that in some kind of prideful way, the universe, the heliocentric universe, like you're proud of this shit and how all this stuff matters, like you're smart. Nah, I'm going to say something in reference to what our ancestors have been saying for so long, which is the polar opposite of what they interpret as the nature of the reality of this universe. Our ancestors did not interpret this reality the way NASA and this Western bullshit ass world interprets the nature of this reality. No, we didn't have that. We weren't a part of that. And that's a big part of why we will forever be at odds with each other. And if you're protecting or even regurgitating that bullshit from that artificial intelligence world, then you are more of a part of the problem than any kind of solution. And a part of that problem is downplaying and demonizing our ancestors by just saying that their cosmology and their interpretations of the nature of their reality was just poppycock and hogwash. How dare you? These savages with their primitive intelligence of how things were. There's no way that they could interpret the nature of this universe better than NASA. I mean, we've sent a sports car to Mars. We've sent people to the moon. That's what I hear when people start defending this shit. And you can see it on their face. They look away with the whole like, you mean you don't believe in gravity? That all that fucking like ignorant, arrogant ass shit. You might as well be spitting on the ancestors who had a completely different interpretation of this reality. So when people start talking like that, I'm envisioning them spitting on the ancestors and just calling them primitive, savage beasts who are not even worth interpreting. And I'm a representative of those ancestors. I will not allow their intelligence to be spit on and cast to the side like it doesn't fucking matter. I'm going to say something about it. And it might hurt your fucking feelings, but I don't give a fuck, because your artificial intelligence is hurting a lot of people's feelings and lives overall. And if I'm in the circle, if I'm around somebody, I'm not going to allow that. I'm not going to allow the amplification of that mind control to go on, especially in real time around me. Fuck no. I'm going to take it to the extreme. And then people don't even they don't even recognize that, this Western so-called intelligence, they conveniently ignore and avoid the reality that the system doesn't understand how ancient buildings were created. They don't know how the pyramids were made, Machu Picchu, Sacsayhuaman, Teotihuacan, like all these laser cut things. They don't even know what that is, so they just push that to the side, and people still fucking believe that they were just animals and dumb, and today are the smartest people. How simple can you fucking be? A robot. You know what? Even a robot looking at that reality will understand that something's a bit off here. If you were to program the question of all the shit that's existing right now into an artificial intelligence, that artificial intelligence at least will probably say, wait a second, well, I can't move forward with saying that the Western world is the peak of human interaction or the human evolution, because you still haven't programmed into me, the computer, how these pyramids were built, how Machu Picchu was built. So no, I cannot say as the artificial intelligence of the universe that the modern people of society are the smartest and the most evolved. I cannot say that. Why? Because you have no fucking idea how the pyramids were made, how they interpret the cosmology, how all these ancient systems around the world are all saying the same story in many different ways. You haven't answered those questions. So, no. In fact, in many different ways, you're more unintelligent than those people, and ignorant and living in a lie, because you're not allowing yourself to humble yourself and really look into those storylines. You're just closing your eyes and acting like you're at the top of the world and burning the books of our ancestors. So, in closing, the lack of ability to question the nature of your reality is de-evolving your experience in the masses of people into less than organic, less than artificial intelligence. You're not allowed to question politics. You're going to be stuck in that reality. You're not allowed to question heliocentrism. You're going to be stuck in that dead, broken, empty ass reality. And like I said, in order to maintain that dead reality, they fill your world with championship sports teams and politics and money, success, celebrities, movies, cartoons, anything that's out there, social media, anything that's going to give you this false sense of evolution, this false sense of victory. You're happy. Anything that's going to tap into your dopamine drips up and down. Whatever keeps you in those extremes is going to maintain the power of this system over you overall. And if you haven't gone into questioning the nature of the heliocentric reality overall, then I would recommend going into that. And my recommendation would be to start by looking at how the ancestors started to interpret this reality. And don't focus so much on trying to be right. Just look at how many different ways that this system is wrong. Because so-called flat earthers, or people who are questioning heliocentrism, they're not saying We're not saying that we have all the answers. We're just saying that the answers that have been fed to us are empty and largely bullshit. And when you remove all of those bullshit ass observations and questions and theories and interpretations of reality, when you remove all that shit, it inherently changes you. It inherently changes your perspective of reality overall. And it humbles you. This is one thing that the Western so-called civilization is severely lacking, which is why people follow it so much. They have a severe lack of humility, and their pride is completely unfounded, but it's just so it is the system, this whole American dream. Watch, here comes 4th of July right around the fucking corner. You're going to see how ignorant people are. This pride in this so-called American way and all that bullshit. The pride in that. How many degrees of separation, how many levels of ignorance are you from questioning anything if you have that level of pride in that many people? It's ridiculous, but it's there. And that's why when you're looking at, things changing or whatever it is, you have to detach yourself from it because it's so much work to do. There's so many things that need to be done for things to change on a larger scale, and just be happy with the things that you're aware of that are changing on your micro scale, because that's at least a proof that something is changing and something that has a potential to change. It's going to be different for every different person in their own way, in their own time. And when enough people do it in their own way, in their own time, hits a certain point, then maybe on a larger scale, things will start changing like that. And we're seeing that happening with other things here and there. But as far as the actual nature of your reality, it's going to take a little while for people to get there. So I would urge people to just, in that reality, in that observation, let go of a lot of it. Let go, detach yourself from it, knowing that it's going to take maybe even lifetimes for something, beneficial enough to change. It might be multiple lifetimes. So in that case, the best you could do is share what you can share and do what you can do within this lifetime. And just know that, hey, at least on your watch, while you were here in this short life term, that you did what you could do in order to affect the whole without having any expectations on it. Knowing that that's all you can do. Because people have the choice to either look the other way or do something about it. And right now, there's so many people lost. We're so outnumbered that it's hard for people to even question, even the question of questioning the nature of their reality. They can't even open the door to questioning the nature of their reality. It's hard enough to just get by. And in many cases, a lot of people know that they're being lied to. Like in a narcissistic relationship, they know it's toxic. They know it's unhealthy. They know it's fucked up. And there's many different reasons why people stay in that. Oh, they think it's the best they could do. They're comfortable in that relationship. They've been doing it for so long. We've been together for 30 years, I'm not going to let that go. But you're being abused. But that's their choice. So people are having to deal with that. They're in that narcissistic, abusive relationship. And that's the first part of needing to let go. This is why so-called black and brown people around the world, people who aren't used as the example of success in this system of racism and white supremacy, we don't have an issue. There's not a lot of barriers for us in the reality for us to let this shit go. We're already on the shit end of the stick. So when somebody opens up the door of, wait a second, they've been lying to you? They've been lying to us? Oh, shit. They've been lying to us anyway. So this doesn't make, this is not a far stretch, from what's already going on. This is why it's easier for us to open up to the nature of our reality a little bit more. First of all, because our ancestors have been doing it forever. So we have that foundation. Secondly, the people in power are known liars. They're known to be bullshitting us forever. But if you're bought into that world, if you're a part of that reality and you're an example of success, like you're the American dream. You got that white picket fence, you have that big job, you have your kids, you have your golden retriever, you have all that shit. Your 401k is looking good, and you know all your friends are all successful. If you're in that world and you can walk out of the door and they don't see a criminal. They see an upstanding Caucasian male who is a part of the evolution of this human experience, and we should tip our hats to them. Yeah. Thank you, sir. You've done it. Thank you. If you're living in that world and you're completely blind to the other world, then who's to say that you should at all question the nature of your reality? It's going to be harder for you to even think about that because you love it so much. But with us, nah. We've had it. We've had it up to the ears with dealing with this shit for so long. But in that same conversation, it's harder in many different ways for our people to get out of that because we've bought into the world of success and power in many different ways. And the controllers behind the scene are very aware of that. You have to control people based upon their demographic in their own way. And this is what's happening. This is why social media is such a crucial part of controlling people, because you can control people on a sharper level of manipulation because people are choosing how they wish to be controlled. They're following the people that themselves are controlled. And in that, like the TV did it on a more broad spectrum approach, but social media is more alive in many different ways because you're following influencers. Your kids, even your kids. Back in the day, your kids were more influenced by cartoons, so they put the little shit in cartoons, like G.I. Joe for me back in the day. They put those little mind controls and how you should see the world and what you want to be like. They put it in shit like G.I. Joe. Nowadays, you have 30 different influencers that these kids are following, 150 different versions of how to be from other influencers and other forms of entertainment and so on and so forth. They have so many different things that are out there, but it's all doing the same thing as what the TV did back then, but even more so on a deeper level because you have the liveliness. It's alive. You have these living influencers who are doing it in real time. And it makes it more real. It makes the artificial intelligence more real when somebody seemingly alive is doing it. So it makes it easier for people to mimic that experience. So yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to share and circle around in this video was ultimately what does cosmology, heliocentrism, what does that do to your relationship with the nature of this reality? And if you could do anything towards tapping into a deeper layer of the nature of your reality, start undoing the things that are being forced into our perspective of reality. Start undoing that stuff and detach from having to fill that space up with anything. Since you let go of NASA and the theories, the gravity theory, Copernicus, Newton, all this shit, when you let go of all that shit, don't be so quick to need to fill it up with something else. Sit there with that emptiness for a while. Make yourself comfortable with it. And that is another experience that will change you at the same time. And eventually, things will start to fall into place on their own. And like I said before, it's not new. Sit in that space. The ancestors had a version of cosmology that was completely, not saying everything that they did was perfect. I'm just saying that the math and the science and the spiritual interpretations of this reality is not new. It's been done before. Not saying that it's perfect, but if you're going to start somewhere, start there. Start there and let go simultaneously. Let go of all the bullshit that's being sold to us on a regular basis at our expense. Because if you do one without the other, you're going to fall into another trap. You have to simultaneously, like I said in the last video, play offense and defense. You have to affect the positive and the negative. If you don't add to both of those sides at the same time when you're processing this work, there'll become an imbalance and you'll fill that space with extra, something to shim underneath that imbalance in order to make it level. And like I said, what people are doing right now with all this information, when they get overwhelmed with this information, they turn on that ego a little bit more and they shim their reality with all this entertainment, constantly adding more shims into that imbalance and just filling up that imbalance even more and more with more entertainment, more ego. Oh, I'm so aware of what's going on that I could just, talk shit about everybody who doesn't think like me. It's another trap. So if you found yourself in those traps, maybe start figuring out ways to get out of there. But keep it simple. Start first by questioning the nature of your reality, and then see what comes about when you go from there.